So you've got this new dollar system kind of emerging. Who is turning on in this block, right? Well, you got the U.S. obviously, assuming the tug of war between the sovereigntist movement, Trump, populism, et cetera, is kind of riding behind. Japan turned on; they're sovereigntist now. I would say Argentina as well. They're turned on. You can see this in South America. I think it's an emerging trend to watch. You've got some major elections this year in Brazil and I believe Colombia. So keep watching here. Um, but in terms of that trend, one of the key things supporting that is you've got to have um, basically control over domain of settle pricing and settlement of the international commodities trade, right? So what are commodities? Like by definition, I would say, or like what would satisfy the definition of commodity? I'd say it's basically a good that every society or the knowledge of ability to produce said good has distributed widely across enough, societies across the globe that the marginal profitability has basically been squished to a minimum, right? So you think about right now, what is not a commodity good? I would say like a very complex NVIDIA state of the art, like Blackwell semiconductor architecture, Taiwan Semiconductors, chip on wafer on substrate, architecture, et cetera. Those are things with, the steps and a significant degree of knowledge, high capital intensity, you know. Joe Schmo can't just start, mastering that process next week if he wants to go into production. That's the opposite of a commodity, right? Commodities, things like oil extraction, mineral resources extraction, et cetera. Uh, Anyone can produce them so long as you have the supply and you load those things onto shipping containers and float them across the the ocean and you trade those from A to B and now you get back to where we were beforehand talking about international reserve currencies, right? And new like systemic paradigms. My point here with this new dollar, one of the key things you're looking for, you've got to retake that settlement venue, like own that domain of pricing and settlement, where kind of that trade in international commodities, cross border, inter nation state, all of that takes place. And so what you see here in the story this week, this was not covered much at all either, but this was on, I believe, the CME earnings call, just the C-suite executives talking. I believe it was the CEO mentioning they're working on a tokenized cash coin developed with Google to roll out this year for crypto collateral. So what does this mean? We talk about stable coins. We talk about the venues, right? The CME as a commodity exchange where, buyers from foreign countries, if you want to go put in your order for the very raw materials and most basic complex goods, but you can also like you can buy oil futures, other commodities, agricultural commodities, energy commodities, metal commodities. You could also buy financial commodities, treasury bonds, interest rate futures, SOFR, all of that. But what this story is showing in terms of that settlement of uh, that kind of base layer of the actual goods economy in the real world, that settlement is now being looked to kind of like base or build downwards onto a base layer of this tokenized cash coin future that we're talking about with Genius, Act, stable coins, et cetera. Now, this is a very Rube Goldberg way, in my opinion, to get to a liquid cash settlement system on a crypto layer. If you go back and read Satoshi's white paper, Bitcoin, an electronic peer-to-peer cash settlement system. I think I got the full title right, very close if not. We already have a tokenized cash coin. Like it's as simple as you can get it. I just don't think the knowledge is there yet. Um, that ultimately that's where this process leads in terms of the only solution. I guess you could make others, but it's the most liquid, deepest, furthest adopted. Call it peer-to-peer cash system.
I think the
Um,
incentives too, right, are to try to find a way to insert yourself somewhere in the
Yeah.
middle of that to try to extract a little bit of extra value for yourself. So there's,
Yeah, but I didn't finish my statement
yeah,
there. That solves the Byzantine Generals problem, right? So that statement there, what is the Byzantine Generals problem? I'm not going to explain that. It's going to take us an hour, but that's the core thing. And Cameron, as you just mentioned, if you can just hop in the middle and extract some of that value, that's what we're trying to do here when we're saying, hey, we need CME Group, Google tokenized cash coin. That's what we're trying to get to, but ultimately you can't compete in my mind with that disruptive innovation on Bitcoin as settlement rails.
100% agree.
Um,
Yep.
that we're still playing through, right? This is going to be a messy process for everybody to figure out. The other thing too is there is an element where you've got to port over the legacy solution onto a new platform. So I can see, the migration over from one system to the other. It's a process that's going to move in terms of, multiple steps. You're going to need some, uh, yeah, catalysts along the way to add energy, get the system to move states, to get value, over here in the incumbent system all the way over here towards what we're building towards. But what we see in this headline from CME Group out of their earnings call is, I believe, right on point in telling you where this dollar settlement needs to go. I was talking to a good friend involved in the Bitcoin space, and they do a lot of venture funding for companies building on the Bitcoin rails, a lot of investment into the monetary infrastructure. What I said here, we talked about the importance of bringing that pricing and settlement uh, of commodities into your sovereign systems domain. I think what we're seeing in metals, right? We talked about in the metals volatility and boom and bust we're going through, and let's say silver, platinum, palladium, all the above, as pricing venue moves from, let's say, Switzerland and London towards the Americas, Chicago, New York, et cetera, and onto these rails. The movement of, starting with metals, right? That's, billions of dollars in daily settled transactions. That is going to move onto this new dollar architecture, or at least as the war that is playing out in real time. But the next thing I believe you're going to see, the next move, and this is in the headlines already with what we saw with the actions this week, Venezuela, Maduro extraction, et cetera. We're next moving oil markets and global energy trade. And you can include liquefied natural gas in that process. But that settlement venue is also being absorbed and kind of what I just call like supplanted and move from, let's say, London, the Brent crude contract, into the United States for, let's say, WTI or similar pricing mechanisms that price set energy commodities based on the U.S. and the Western Hemisphere's marginal production as opposed to, let's say, Europe's or London's